Could you let Asos to unmute herself?
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. My laptop was being difficult. Shall we wait for a few more people?
Yeah, maybe one more minute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if you're happy to, Mr. Shank, I think we'll start now. Yeah, let me just. Okay. Hi guys, welcome to another GCMR event. This time it's with Mr. Aparajaya Shankar, who'll be talking to us generally about research and how medical students can get involved with research. Like last time, if you were not here, if you hear anything that you like being said, then you can put a +1 or you can put the clap emoji. We're going to be accepting and answering, Mr. Shankar is going to be accepting and answering questions at the end of the session. So if you think of any question during the session, feel free to put it in the group chat, in the messaging chat bit. I'm Judith, by the way. I'm one of the ambassadors for GCMR Bulgaria. The other ambassador is Elahe, which is
everyone.
And we also have Pradeepa, our events coordinator. Please follow us on Instagram, GCMR. Elahe will put the handle name on the chat, and you can find more events that hopefully we'll be doing later on in the months to come. So a bit about Mr. Shankar. I don't know if any of you have seen him, any people who go to Pleven. He's well known in Pleven Medical University. He's literally everywhere. So he's an intern in the Department of Oncosurgery in Base 1, which is Georges Stransky in Pleven. He's the director of the Standing Committee on Public Health with Association of Medical Studies of Bulgaria, which is AMSB. And also he's deeply interested in research. Like I've seen the posters scattered across the university. It's quite inspiring as a student. He's got various publications in various fields of medicine, such as public health, cardiology, oncogynecology, surgery, and now hopefully oncosurgery. And he's working on numerous international multi-center trials in oncological surgery. He's an avid debater. Anybody, again, people from NU Pleven, if you've seen him, He's normally the one who hosts the debates that we carry out. And he's also a passionate medical educator with a deep interest for medical policy in Europe within the context of European security. He has his own website, www.aparajaya.com, which will be put in the chat again. So take it away.
Judith and Elahe, first of all, thank you very much for that really warm welcome. And thank you so much for, those words of praise will really just, I'm undeserving of all that. I mean, that's a little, yeah, but I'm very thankful and humbled at the same time. Normally when I am asked to talk and talk about myself, there is always this idea that, you should have a little bit of humility. And I am trying to practice a little bit of that and quite obviously failing at it. But, I am very, very thankful that your organization reached out to me to invite me on this talk and to give me this opportunity to connect with other medical students and to share, my experiences with research. And one of the most important things that I would like for everybody to take away from here is that, as medical students, we don't really have much of an advantage when it comes to research, right? And it is important for organizations like the GCMER to, sort of take the lead when it comes to, putting researchers together. And most importantly, giving medical students a voice. And that is very, very important for all of us here. So for that, I really want to thank both Judith and Elahe for this and for, organizing this thing and for really taking the weight off of my shoulders for, letting me speak. And for that, I'm really, really grateful. So, I'm going to try to present a presentation here. And I understand that, in the context of COVID-19 over the last 2 years, all of us have been, watching a lot of presentations, but this presentation is not going to be a typical lecture, because I want as many of you to try to type in the chat or whatever. And I have received a lot of your questions, and I think that, I can't give you a full-fledged in-depth analysis of research itself. So this is going to be a short introduction only. But more importantly, I will try to discuss more practical ways of getting into research itself. So, which I think is more important, because, you have to try to have practical tips on how to get involved in research. Anybody can carry out research. That is the guiding principle for this evening. And one more thing that I would like for all of you to sort of meditate on before we go further is that you are not just a medical student. You're not just a first-year student or a second-year student. All of you have something very important to contribute to medicine. And all of you can be part of research. And I'm very sorry, somebody's messaging me as well. Yeah, thank you for the messages. I know it's all right. But one thing that all of us need to understand is that it is very important for all of us to consider just the idea that all of us can be part of medical research, and no matter what stage of medical education you are in. And I started research in general before I became a medical student. And I started medical education and medical research when I was in second year. So it is very important for all of us to, sort of remember that, very sorry. Yeah. It is very important for all of us to remember that you have to understand just one thing, which is that medical research is for everyone. So with that said, I am just going to move forward with my presentation. And throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. So this is the topic for today's talk, and it's called Candles in the Dark, an introduction to research for medical students. And the reason why I chose this topic or this title, it's not a original title from my end. It's a adaptation from an autobiography of a very well-known scientist called Richard Dawkins. Now, Richard Dawkins is a brilliant scientist, and he is the founder of the word meme. We are all aware of what memes are, but he is actually the person who coined the term. And he's a very controversial scientist because he's also an avid atheist, but his autobiography is called A Brief Candle in the Dark. And I have decided to, sort of seek inspiration from that book and from his work as well, because at the end of the day, the kind of medical research that we do is just us doing the same thing. We are just, little candles in the dark, in the dark of what we don't know. We are just, small candles, and we try to illuminate a little bit of what is around us. And as a medical student, you can do exactly just that. So research, I just want all of you to just think in your mind and conjure up the first image that comes up with the word research. Please, just think in your head and just try to come up with, 3 things that you associate with research, right? And as a thought experiment, just do that for a minute, and we will then move forward, because research, no matter what you perceive research to be, it's often, much more than that. It's research is often bigger. Research is often, an avenue for discovering a lot of different things, and a lot of things go into research. And you will discover that the more you learn about research, the more things you'll be able to understand that you yourself will be able to contribute to when it comes to medical research itself. So I will talk about my own presentations and my own publications much later in this presentation, but this is a small snapshot of where my co-authors are from. And you can see that they cover up one small part of the world, but they do cover 3 different continents to an extent. You can see, I have co-authors from India, from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from Greece, from Bulgaria, from Switzerland, the UK, and from Afghanistan, from Nigeria, from Tunisia, Algeria, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that we need to understand about research is that it is truly a collaborative effort, right? And this is what research does. It sort of brings people together. It brings and builds this bridge for everybody to come together. So when we think about research, there are 4 aspects of research that all of us need to sort of understand. Number 1, what is medical research? When we talk about research, what are we talking about actually? What can you do as a student, and what can you write, and so on and so forth? Second is, why should you be involved in research, right? Number 3 is how, and number 4 is where. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to sort of try to unpack these 4 subdomains of research and try to look at research from these 4 angles. And my idea is going to just be very simple, in the sense that I want to just sort of break the entire idea of medical research into these 4 congruent parts. So what is medical research, right? Simply put, these 6 things here, letters to the editor, surveys, case studies, systematic reviews, case history analysis, and multi-center audits, these are parts of medical research. But usually medical research is also very, very vast. You have case control studies, you have cohort studies, you have, systematic reviews, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I've not involved the whole breadth of medical research is because, as medical students, it is not always possible to be involved in a lot of different types of research, right? Especially when it comes to, say, for example, pharmaceutical development, for example, it's not always possible, right? But these 6 things, right, sort of form 60% of medical research today, right? And they will form a solid foundation for the research that you will do as a medical student, right? And so when you think about medical research as a medical student, these are the 6 areas of medical research that you can contribute to. And then from there, develop into your own ideas as a medical student or as a researcher, right? And remember that medical research, much like anything else in life, has to come step by step. And that, is the most important part of understanding where you are when it comes to medicine, and when it comes to clinical research as well. So let's go now quickly over why should you get involved in medical research, right? Now, I can't answer this question for you. Your motivations are entirely your own. But there are four things that sort of define my own motivations for getting into medical research itself. The first was that I was deeply interested in medical research. I always wanted to know more about medicine, about what I was studying, what I was not studying, why I was not studying certain things, in the sense that why were we using certain kinds of drugs and not the others? Why do we use a certain operative technique but not the others, right? What defines the parameters of a good surgeon, for example, right? And it is this deep interest that sort of inculcated in me an idea that I should get more deeply involved in medical research as well, right? Now, the second was that I was deeply inspired by other people who were in the field. Some of my closest friends are PhD students, and they're actually influential researchers. They are from Ukraine and Greece, and they are very close friends of mine. And it was their constant encouragement that helped me get involved in research as well. So a very important aspect of being involved in medical research as a medical student is this is mentorship and peer-to-peer encouragement of medical students. So to be very frank with you, the reason why I managed to get involved in medical research was not because I'm particularly a genius at anything or particularly good at something very brilliant. I was helped in my journey because of the friends I had, right? And because of this, and yes, there are ways of sort of building contacts and approaching scientists and approaching researchers and so on and so forth. And that is what I will do, because that is what I will talk to you about, because it has always been my sort of aim in Pleven as well, to try to create a research network, right? Because this idea of helping other younger students and so on and so forth to get involved in medical research is central to being able to encourage medical research, right? And the other two inspirations, was that I wanted to improve my interactions with my patients. I wanted to improve the outcomes for my patients. Now, as a young medical student, when I was in the second year, I really wasn't going to do much for changing my patients' lives. It's not really possible. But what I did understand was that if I helped in creating better evidence for my patients to investigate, drugs, to investigate methods, to investigate clinical laboratory science, to investigate procedures and things like this, then even if one of these papers has some value and gets written and published and it is accessible by people in the world, then somewhere in some abstract way, I can help in the improvement of the delivery of patient care. And that has always been one of my core ideas about becoming a doctor as well. It is always to, sort of try to improve patient care in whatever means that I could. And finally, as a medical student, I realized that I was a passive observer most of the time in medicine. It was always me just having to learn things all the time, just do what you're told, like, okay, go study these 20 topics from the synopsis and give this colloquium and pass this exam. And, I mean, all of that is fun and very interesting. There's no single doubt about it. And there is no other field or career that I would do apart from medicine, right? But I realized that I wanted to be an active participant in medicine, and I just wasn't, I didn't have the patience to wait till I got my degree to do more in the field of medicine. And so that was one of my core motivations. Now, you can have your own motivation. It could be anything from getting a better CV. It could be just you need a hobby, right? You want to just, do something with your life that is, sort of separate from, just studying all day. But medical research will help you with that. And so you have to try to understand what your motivations are for getting into medical research, because one thing that you need to understand about medical research is that it will require a lot of your time. It requires a lot of your dedication, and it requires a lot of hard work from your end. And if you're okay with committing your dedication, time, your energy, then you're completely fine. It requires just that. It's not really a examination of how skilled you are or anything. Everybody has to start somewhere. So even if you have no experience whatsoever, it doesn't matter. The most brilliant scientist that you can think of was, like you, once a student with nothing, right? So you have to understand that you have to get started, and just getting started and throwing yourself in there is the way forward. So my primary motivation, like I said, was to be an active participant in medicine and to contribute to medicine as much as I could and as early as I could. And that was it. At the time when I started as well, I really didn't know much about like building your CV and so on and so forth. And that's a part of medical research that is important. And we'll be discussing that towards the end of the presentation as well, because I've received a lot of questions about it and I thought that I'll just discuss it later. But my first and primary motivation was always to try to be as actively involved in medicine as soon as possible. So, I mean, I was not a very patient person when I was younger. So the devil's in the data, right? So let's take a look at what medical research actually entails. And medical research, is not just about, data analysis and statistics and stuff like that. A lot of it goes into like writing the paper properly, to be able to think about things in a different light. It requires perspective. It requires you to look at various different things, right? And so we will go first into what goes into the writing of a research paper itself, right? And so when you're trying to write a research paper, you need to go through a 4-part process. Now, I'm not going to talk about the publishing part because publishing is a separate thing altogether. Like publishing will take another talk on its own, and I will go through it briefly, but publishing is very different. Right now, my aim is to try to help you get into research. Normally, when you get into research, what happens is that when you make the right connections and you speak to the professors and so on and so forth, they will take care of the publishing part with you, right? So the first thing always is that you have to identify and look for a topic that you want to write about, right? But how do you come up with that topic? You can't, wait much like Newton under an apple tree. You can't do that anymore, and all of that is not even necessary because what you must actually do is to try to read, and you have to read as many papers as possible, to read as much scientific journals as possible, articles as possible. Even reading your textbooks and reading a lot of different textbooks will also help you, because most of medical writing involves writing and citing your sources. And so it is always important to explore the sources section of anything that you're reading. Look into the source, and that's how you begin the journey towards background research for any paper. The second is searching databases. Constructing an effective, search is very important to your methodology as well. So I will also, in the course of this talk, teach you how to use the various databases available. There's PubMed, Medline, Google Scholar. Those are the 3 things that I use. And I also use Elsevier to search for papers and so on and so forth. And then the third part is actually understanding and connecting the dots between different studies, and that is actually what builds your paper. Your paper is built actually upon a connection between 2 studies, and sort of drawing the bridge between related studies, or not drawing a bridge between 2 related studies. Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes you have to try to say that, okay, no, there is no connection between 2 things. For example, off the top of my head, there was a long analysis for a long time about whether cell phone usage increases the rate of glioblastomas in the brain. For 10 years, researchers have tried to investigate it, and they have found no link whatsoever, right? And that is also important, because you have to understand that it's when you're doing medical research, it's not just about proving the causal relationship between 2 things, not just that X causes Y. You have to also sometimes prove that there is no relationship between X and Y, right? And so the avenue of medical research itself is deeply, deeply vast, and a lot of different ideas actually are good ideas, and they just need to be written. That's the only problem. And so you have number 4, the most important part of the research paper so far, which is to actually write it. And it is also the hardest part, because actually sitting down at your desk and writing something is an immensely difficult task. And I can tell you this because I've done it. And, because there are 10,000 other things you could be doing, because, research papers require you to write in a neutral tone. They require you to have scientific consistency. The grammar use has to be good. You're not supposed to use emotionally charged language, no personal language, things like this. So there's a way to write these papers as well. And every time you read a scientific paper, you will know the difference between a scientific paper and a short story, for example. And so, you have to try to understand that reading a scientific paper, for example, is extremely important, right? And it's not just reading it once. You need to sometimes read it 2 or 3 times to really grasp what's being said. So with that said, let's go to the next slide. And these are the skills that you need to becoming a good researcher. And we will keep going back to this slide in the course of this talk, primarily because, you will see that some of the skills here are critically reading a paper, critically appraising a paper, and how do we develop it, and can you develop it, right? And you will see that everywhere there is a skill. I've always said that yes, you can, because remember, most of scientific research is not some sort of inborn gift. Scientific researchers are not born, they are made. You can learn how to do scientific research, and it'll just take time. And it's not that it's just research that you're doing. It's not some abstract concept. Usually research is divided into these 4 domains. One is the reading part, critically appraising it. There's data analysis, statistical analysis, then there is the study design, then writing of the abstract, writing of the paper, and then organizing. Organization, is the glue that sort of holds the team together. Now, all of those things are skills that you can learn. And the way to learn those skills is, by either speaking to people who are, who have experience, or learning as you go, right? And, the one thing is that, one of the most important things that you can do is that don't get held up with really ambitious ideas right off the bat. You don't have to design a study or a multi-center trial as your first publication. That is not required, right? The first thing you need to do is to, sort of flesh out your idea. It's not the study design that is important, it's the idea that is important. So whenever you have an idea, no matter how outlandish it sounds, right, write down the idea and then try to do some background research on the idea. So that would mean, sitting and reading through multiple papers related to that topic, critically appraising those papers, right? And then analyzing the papers, looking at whether the statistical methods are consistent or not. And number 2, for example, statistical analysis and data analysis are also 2 domains of study. Now, with full disclosure, I am not very good at statistical analysis because I did study medical statistics when I was in the 2nd year. And I would recommend that everybody who has the chance to do so does take it as an optional subject if they want, right? But it is not really important. It is a moderate importance if you can do it, because you can always learn these skills. You can learn them by looking at YouTube videos, which is exactly what I did as well. It is not that important. And for example, if you need some statistical analysis done, find someone who's good at statistics. You see, the core idea of medical research is always that you're not working alone most of the time. You're working with a group of people, and each person in a research group, brings with themselves a series of skills. And that is what you need to focus on. What can you bring to a research group, right? What can you bring to the table, right? And I am going to talk about what you can bring to the table as well as a medical student, because there are a lot of different things you can bring. And one of the most important things is perspective, right? So now let's go on to writing of the abstract and organizing and stuff like this. Now, all of these are much more easier to do now because of the fact that we have communication apps and we have a lot of different, ways of sort of, communicating and collaborating with each other on massive projects, So for example, one of the studies that I'm part of right now at the Department of Oncological Surgery has, 400 other hospitals. Each hospital is generating tons and tons of data. Right now, for example, I am working with 20 other people. I'm coordinating 20 other people on the research project, and that is entirely achievable simply through a phone and an internet connection. It does not require anything greater than that, right? The research papers that I have written have been written in conjunction with authors from across the world, Greece, Sweden, Switzerland, Afghanistan, Ukraine. And it is possible simply because of the sheer magnificence of the internet itself, right? So let's focus now again on what the take-home message is here. The most important message here is that you can learn those skills that you need. And you can learn these skills, over time. You don't have to, it is not possible for most of us, to come into a medical research group with every piece of knowledge that you can possibly imagine. And most of the time, that is not going to be expected of you either. As a medical student, most likely you'll be starting in data collection first. You'll be instructed on how to collect data. You'll be certified or validated in some way, and then you go on forward from there, right? And every skill that is related to medical research can be developed. And there are a lot of different skills as well, and there is no researcher who has every skill available. It is not possible, and especially when you work in multidisciplinary research teams, which is very, very common now. You will understand that every specialist comes with their own expertise. So one of the things that you have to do is to identify the strengths that you have and the expertise that you can bring. Right? So now to the most important part of the entire presentation itself. How do you get involved in research? What are some practical ways of getting involved? So the first thing is to go to scientific conferences as a passive participant. You just go there and observe. The first thing that will do is to sort of show you the different people who are part of research, right? The different scientists and the different students who are all presenting different papers. And what that does is that will give you an opportunity to network, right? And most of scientific research is entirely based on how well you can network. That's it. So joining and going to scientific conferences, whether they're online or offline, is the best way to start with getting involved in research. And it is very simple. If you like a paper, go up to the person who has written it or presented it and say that you like the paper and you would like to work with them over, over any future projects they have. Exchange phone numbers, and if you have Instagram and so on and so forth, just go and just do it. Just follow them and make that kind of connection. Now, the research papers that I have written is, as well are entirely down to the fact that I met my colleagues and co-authors at conferences, right? And I met them at conferences, and I met them at the conference here in Pleven. And I met one of my closest friends as well. She and I have written 3 papers together, and it was very simple. We met at the conference. I liked her paper, and she liked the paper that I had written, and that was the first time I actually attended a conference as an active participant. And we got to talking, and then we realized that okay, both of us have similar areas of interest, and that's it. That's how we started writing and collaborating on papers, and that is something that we've continued even now. And it's been 4 years since we started, and that is generally how scientific research works. There is no other. Like primarily, you have to accept that it is just how well you can network that determines how many papers, or that determines how easily you can get involved till you become a postgrad. And when you are in postgrad, publishing becomes easier and also becomes very streamlined, simply because in many countries, Bulgaria included, you may be simultaneously involved both in research because it is part of your job as a specialist, and also because you may be enrolled in a PhD program at the same time. So what happens in those cases is that medical research becomes compulsory. You have to publish a certain number of papers a year, or you have to have a certain minimum number of publications. And in the US, for example, residents have to be a part of a journal club where they have to discuss the latest research every week. They also have to keep publishing all the time. So in certain countries like the US, maybe in the UK as well, where this is a part of the academic culture, it is easier for their students to not get involved in research per se, but they have a more of an understanding of the research process. But remember that as a medical student, you are going to be at a disadvantage simply because you are a medical student. And we are not free from bias at all. One of the one of the worst biases that you can ever face, and most of us here will have an experience of it, is that you are just a medical student. I would like to once again reiterate that nobody is just a medical student, right? Everybody starts their career in medicine as a medical student. A medical student has a lot to offer, right? Currently, for example, I am working with medical students as well. I started my research as a medical student. The thing is that this idea has to first be dispelled as much as is possible, that medical students can't contribute to research. Yes, you can. And, you have to just be given the opportunities to do so. Now, one way of getting into medical research is also by joining local scientific organizations. So a lot of scientific organizations will give you discounts or will give you like free admission to joining their organizations. Even at, even here in Pleven, for example, there's the MU Pleven Surgical Society, and there's a MU Pleven Research and Audit Society. So these are the societies you need to join, and you need to sort of talk to them. And and once you join these societies, what happens is that they do have a sort of a section where they are trying to look for people for research. And especially if you are in the West, for example, in America, in the UK, and so on and so forth, the local scientific organizations always have student memberships, and the scientific organizations will always be involved in some kind of research. Most of the time, it is just that you need to send out an email stating your intent that yes, you are interested in research, and if it is possible for the organization secretary, for example, to connect you with someone who is currently carrying out some kind of research. Now, most importantly here, one of the things that I would like to also emphasize is the PhD students at your university, whether you are in Bulgaria or in any other country in Europe, the PhD students at the university that you're working at will always be working on some research project, because it is required by the regulations for them to be involved in it. And if you have to go and you have to ask them, right? And you have to just state what you want in very clear terms, that, okay, yes, I would like to publish a few papers. Can I be involved in some kind of research? And it is very important for you to just go out there and just ask, because, it is very rare for research teams, to, for example, to put out an advertisement anywhere that, yeah, we're looking for researchers or whatever. They're not going to do that. Most of the time, likely because of the fact that most people are really busy, they won't do that. So you'll have to go and sort of approach them. Now, in Pleven, for example, one way you can, Pleven, Sofia, so on and so forth, one of the things that you can do is to go and speak to your assistants and your professors directly. If you are interested in research, the first step you should do is to go and speak to the assistant who is teaching you a certain subject, whether it is surgery, internal medicine, whatever, and ask if they are involved in any kind of research, and ask if there is a way for you to be involved in research. Now, most of the research that they will be doing is going to be, case studies and things like this. Now, whenever you do a case study, right, it is very important to get ethical approval from the patient and from the treating doctor as well. So if you go and speak to them and take their permission, they will be able to guide you as well about which cases they want to talk about, which areas of research they're doing, which themes of research their departments are focused on. And in general, remember that every department here at the university is carrying out research because they're funded to do so. And they're doing research in various themes, right? Whether it could be endocrinology research, cancer, oncological surgery, could be anything. And they're all doing research in a specific area. You just have to go and ask, because they are not going to tell you simply because, in scientific research, nobody really is in the business of advertising what they're doing, not because of some nefarious purpose. It's just that idea has not really reached anybody. So you have to go out there and ask. And to be very honest with you, that is often the most hardest, that's the hardest step you can take, that of going and asking somebody that, oh, can I be part of research? Because the one thing is that, you are going to constantly, question yourself that, oh, I'm a medical student, on what basis do I ask? From my experience, and it is my experience only, but most of the departments here have some involvement with research and they want students in there. Now, the thing is that you have to just go and ask and see what kind of research that they're willing to take students on in. So for example, it depends on the kind of research, for example, they're doing. And sometimes you just have to have your own ideas and go to them with an idea. That's it. If you have an idea, go with something called a research proposal and take that research proposal and go straight to the department and say that, yes, I have this research proposal. I want to write this kind of paper and I would like your help on it. So for example, currently I'm writing a paper called The Philosophy of Oncological Surgery. And that is a Delphi study. So a Delphi study would mean that it's called a consensus study. That means that I would like to come to an agreement about a certain series of statements. And the way that is done is that, I ask a few experts in a field about their opinions about a certain topic. And then once the maximum number of experts agree on a certain statement, only that statement is carried forward. So that is what a basic Delphi study is. Now, Delphi studies are a little difficult to coordinate because you need to speak to maybe 20 or 30 different experts and things like that. But I just decided to write the proposal, go directly and say that, yeah, this is the paper I'm writing, please help me with it. And that's how it was done. So many times you have to take the initiative yourself. In most research cases, that is what you have to do. And that is only going to change once you become a postgrad yourself and you start specializing. And that's when you will have more of an idea as to what you want to do. But as a medical student, which is what this talk is about, you'll have to show a lot of initiative. And the initiative is that sometimes you have to write your own research idea that you have, go and speak to somebody who will help you write it and just pitch your ideas. That's it. Now, there are two other areas that you can sort of see from the board itself. One of them is that, contact the students from university who are involved in research projects. So, for example, you can contact me. I will be leaving my contact details in the chat as well. And anyone who's written papers and all that, can always ask if they are willing to help you out with research. And 99% of the time, you will see that there are people who want to help you out as well, right? Simply because, the more the merrier. Right. For example, a lot of times you'll have to just go and ask senior students who've been involved in research and just ask them for help. That's it. And, you're not going to get an immediate response. It's not like, okay, you ask about research and just in a week, you're going to get assigned to a team or whatever. That's not how it works. Usually it'll take some time because most of us are not funding these research papers or whatever. We are all trying to work together with limited resources because we're all medical students and, we are in Bulgaria where we don't really have funding per se for a lot of research work. So you have to just be patient as well. So this is one of the ways you can get involved in. These are the ways you can get involved in research. So now we get to a more personal journey. My own journey through medical research. So my journey through medicine and medical research actually began before I started studying medicine. Actually, I was always interested in research because I was a debater, and I found that there's a lot of similarity between debate and medical research, for the simple reason that in debate, you do the same thing, which is that you have to listen to what the other side is saying, and you have to try to see whether what they are saying is actually in fact true, and whether what they're saying makes any sense, for want of a better term, right? And I realized that I was always very deeply interested in, in constructing proper arguments, right? That's how you win debates. And so when I was in school as well as a young boy, I had to do a lot of research to sort of understand the background and the history and the context behind the topics that we were debating on, and that gave me a certain level of sort of the tools to delve deep into topics and to sort of understand things from different perspectives before making an opinion or making an argument, or sort of making points for debates. And my own journey through medical research, specifically through medicine, began in 2017 when I was in second year. And I wrote my first paper called Public Health for an Aging Population. Now, I wrote the paper without anyone's help or an input or anything. It was a very simple paper. It was a systematic review of existing public health frameworks and to see whether Bulgaria itself complied with those frameworks for an aging population. And then I combined it with a statistical analysis, say from, whether, the local people in Pleven knew anything about aging, whether they knew that, aging is, the elderly people require special types of protection and what active aging was and so on and so forth. And I just did it on my own because the idea here was that I was asked to do a presentation on aging in social medicine. And I realized that, okay, I couldn't just do a presentation. I wanted to do some background research. And in that background research, I realized that, okay, I need to add certain perspectives from the elderly population in Bulgaria, like especially in Pleven. And that actually sort of sparked my whole career in medical research. And once I had all my statistical analysis and research and my systematic review sort of ready, I presented the topic at my class, and Professor Kambarova told me pretty much that I should just submit this for the conference here in Pleven, the International Conference for Young Doctors and Medical Students. And it was as simple as that. And before I started doing medical research, I was also involved at, writing for, writing policy papers and things like this and assisting with research like that, which was more to do with current affairs and an analysis of security and defense and so on and so forth, and not really related to medicine in the strictest sense of the word. But in medicine, that's how I started. It was just by me just writing the paper. I didn't really know much about statistical analysis or anything, but I knew that, okay, I have to just keep it simple, keep it short, and just go with the topic and go as in depth into the topic as possible. And I presented this paper at the international conference in 2018 in Pleven. It won the second place for the best presentation. And that is how my career in medical research started. And as you can see, again, I'm going to just show you this slide here, which is a map of where my co-authors are from. And you can see the blue there is actually Ukraine. One of my closest friends is from Ukraine, and she and I have collaborated and co-authored 3 papers together. And the core idea here is that research actually brings nations together. And one of the most heartbreaking things that I had to know in the last month was that one of the places where I had written papers for and submitted and won an award for a scientific research paper that I had done, the VN Karazin Institute of Medical Sciences, one of Kharkiv's, one of Ukraine's most well-respected institutes in medicine, was directly attacked and bombed by the airstrikes. And the issue here is that you have to understand that research is not just something vague, and it's not just some papers being written. Research is actually a human endeavor. And that is why, I focused on the candles in the dark part, because all of this research that we do brings us all together. It is the only one thing that actually unites us all, regardless of what we're doing, because we're all united in purpose, which is to serve our patients better. Now, I will just show you one last slide, which is my own statistics as a researcher. So scientific conferences where I attended as an active participant is 5, which there are 5 papers I've written who were accepted as to be presented, and these are all oral presentations. I don't really do poster presentations. Poster presentations are also good, But the idea with poster presentations is that, it's always better to try to go for an oral presentation, but it depends on the circumstances in which you can write them. Peer-reviewed papers that are published, 5 of them so far. There are 2 more, I think, no, 3 more that are under the peer review process, and it's going to take months, unfortunately. Chapters of textbooks that I have co-authored are 3. One is on cardiac surgery, on the Fontan procedure for hypoplastic right heart syndrome, which is a very rare developmental disorder of the right ventricle and right auricle. One is on gynecology, and the third one is on disaster medicine or combat medicine. I wrote it a few years ago, I think 2016, it was when I was in first year medicine. And then articles published as part of a think tank. Now I work at the European Student Think Tank, and I've been working with them since 2018. And I was a contributing writer first there, where I talked about public health and so on and so forth. I also analyzed COVID-19, and our think tank was the first to publish and talk about COVID-19. And as part of the public health working group, I was invited to talk about COVID-19 in February of 2020, which is a month before it was declared a global pandemic. And in terms of case studies that I have presented at various different, conferences and so on and so forth, I've got 4 of them. Now, the reason why I'm showing this to you is because these numbers are, when you compare them with a scientist or postgrad, these are nothing, right? But these will show you that if it is possible for me, it is possible for you. It is, I do not accept that, as a medical student, that you cannot get published and all that, because a lot of times people do say that, yeah, medical students can't be published, or, it is difficult for medical students to be published. Yes, it is difficult to be published in general. Publication itself, or getting published in a medical journal, is a difficult and frankly very frustrating process, but it is possible. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because when I was in the second year of medical school, the year that I started my medical research was also the year when I failed my anatomy exam and my physiology exam, and I was actually on the cusp of leaving medicine altogether, but I didn't, and I continued to stay, and here I am. So remember that, what medical research does is that, it serves a lot of different things. It's good for your CV, it's good for you, for your patients, and it's also good to sort of remind you that you're not just a passive observer who's constantly just writing papers, or like just, you're not just, giving exams all the time. And, you can fail exams here and there. I failed a couple exams, right? But it doesn't matter. You do not need to be an academic genius to be able to write a research paper. And these statistics and this slide is going to prove that to you, because I am not an academic genius by any metric whatsoever. But if I can do it, so can you. What medical research actually requires of you is just dedication, and you will find the freedom to choose your topics, your areas of research as a researcher. It gives you that freedom, right? And eventually you will all get there. And, one of the things that I hope that this talk has been able to do is to be able to sort of let you, get an introductory insight into medical research and how you can get involved. Now, there are a lot of other things about medical research, like H indexes, impact factors, journals, and publishing. But all of that is very separate and very different, and it's a topic for another day, because publication is a separate process from just getting involved in research itself, right? Now, with that said, I'm aware that there are a lot of questions. So what I'm going to do is to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we can go into the quick Q&A session and answer some of your questions that I had the opportunity to receive. And you can send in questions in the chat as well.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. I realized how there were so many more ways to get involved in research than I had imagined, and I will definitely try them next time. And it's quite inspirational how you started your journey with research early on, and you were used to do background research to form the constructive arguments, and it's often the small characteristics that make us or make people take this research journey. And it's interesting how your co-authors are from 3 different continents, and hopefully it encourages others to continue to ask for research opportunities, and that you can have many projects going on at the same time, and you can learn the skills along the way. So yeah. You may ask your questions if you have questions in the chat box, and we had some questions in the form, in the registration form. Ishika asks, is research in first year too early?
Okay, so no, it's not too early. It's never too early to be involved in research. Now, yes, does it make, is being a first year student like going to be difficult? Yeah, research is going to be difficult because if you don't know a lot of things in medicine itself, is going to be difficult for you to be able to research really complicated things. But different people in research or in a research team serve different roles, right? So you could be doing anything very basic from data collection itself, or you could just be helping to edit a paper, or you could be doing anything very simple like writing a case study properly, which is arranging the case study, ensuring that there is compliance with the guidelines, things like that. That also makes you part of the research paper. And in most research units, or whenever you get part of a research paper, you will be explained, you will get instructions as to what you're going to do and what is expected of you. And being in first year, if you want to get involved in research in first year, just go for it. Don't ask. There's never time that is too early to be involved in medical research at all.
Thank you. And another person asks, what drives the research?
Okay, so research, I'm going to interpret this as like what drives research in general. I mean, research is done for a lot of different things. It's to, number one, the primary reason why all of us try to do research is to improve patient outcomes, actually. And the primary purpose for research is to improve patient outcomes based on evidence, right? Now, evidence-based medicine is this aspect of medicine that all decisions that you make are done entirely through evidence, right? So, for example, let's take a look at just the fact that, okay, over the past 5 years, the recommended dose for angiotensin receptor blockers, losartan, valsartan, telmisartan, for example, have all changed. And why is that? That is because there has been multiple rounds of research on which dose is appropriate to give to what kind of patient. And that kind of conclusion you can only come at if you've done appropriate levels of research. And so that is actually what drives research. The primary motivating factor for research is always to try to get at better delivery of care for our patients. That's it. In surgical research, on the other hand, it's to understand what aspect of the surgery that we are doing needs to be improved so that there is less complications after the surgery, right? It's also to better select patients for certain types of surgeries. So these are the things that sort of drive research. The primary motivation is always to improve patient outcomes.
Thank you. And Madiha asks about an overview on the research process, which departments to ask, and what is expected from the students.
Okay, so in terms of, an overview, the research process is always the same. There's a background process where you do the research, you collect the data depending on the kind of research you're doing, and then you have to synthesize the data, which is usually somebody more experienced than you is going to do it. Usually somebody who's very well versed in statistics, who will look at all the data that's been collected, and then sort of look at all the trends and the interpretations of that data, and then you or a second person who's with you will look at the conclusions made by the other researchers to see whether the data has been interpreted correctly. Now, for example, my job as a second author is always that. Like, for example, one of the papers that I've written is called the link between TSH levels and atrial fibrillation. Now, that was a paper written a couple of years ago, and I don't really remember the specifics of it, but one of the things that we had done there was to understand the level of atrial fibrillation and the incidence of atrial fibrillation in different patients with differing thyroid function, right? Now, what I had to do was, like, I didn't do the data collection itself. My colleague, who was the first author, she did the data collection by going through all the patients in a 5-year period. Now, my job was to ensure that she had collected the data properly. So I went and looked at all of it and saw that, okay, yeah, there are 30 patients who have this, who have been classified correctly as having, hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. Okay. And then I had to just look at the statistical analysis that she had done to see whether there's an actual association between thyroid function and atrial fibrillation or not, right? So what I was doing was to re-verify what she had done. And if we disagreed, then we would have to sit and redo the entire thing again. You understand? Because the research process is always sometimes very contentious also. Like, for example, you sit and argue one point because you don't come to a consensus about it at all. And the second reviewer or the second person, or sometimes, medical student, whatever, because I was a 3rd-year student at the time, I think, 4th year, yeah. So a 4th-year student at the time. I may not know that much, but when I know what we are studying, and then I went and did all the background research on TSH and atrial fibrillation as I could, then I could understand that, okay, yeah, we do have concrete evidence that certain types of thyroid dysfunction cause, like, there's a link between the status of thyroid dysfunction and incidence of AF, atrial fibrillation. But there is no statistical evidence to say that the two of them are related or not, right? So, we had to write our paper in that way. You see, one thing you have to understand about research itself is that, correlation does not imply causation. For example, if one of the most common things that you see about vaccine research, is that, people who had more vaccines are more likely to have myocardial infarction. Like 30 people took the vaccine and 20 people had myocardial infarctions. You see, the point here is that, yeah, 20 people can have myocardial infarctions, but that doesn't mean that the vaccine caused the myocardial infarction. The job of the researcher is to see whether the vaccine caused the myocardial infarction or to prove that there is no link between the two. You understand? And that is also a very important part of the medical research process. And you understand that when it's just a series of numbers and it's a series of conclusions and things like this, a medical student can do just as much as a senior researcher. You understand that because medical research has become so highly specialized and divided and, sort of broken down into chunks, you can do your own part as well. And always remember that in a research team, one person is verifying what the other person is doing as well. So that when we design a study, like a systematic review, one of which I published as well. In that systematic review, for example, I did a search of we did it on intermittent fasting and whether there was any link between intermittent fasting and its effects on patients who already had type 2 diabetes and whether it was actually useful for them, whether it reduced cardiovascular mortality, right? Because, a lot of people say, oh, intermittent fasting is, doing wonders for me. Fine. We wanted to scientifically verify whether it is actually doing wonders for you or not, right? And it came out, it was bred out of spite, not because, we wanted to prove something. We just wanted to see whether intermittent fasting is actually helpful or not. And so what we did was that my colleague, she sat and she did one kind of search. I did another kind of search. And both of us came to the same conclusion that, okay, these are the papers that mention intermittent fasting and cardiovascular risk, but there's no effect between intermittent fasting and cardiovascular risk reduction. Like, it doesn't really reduce it. right? It improves certain parameters, which is like, okay, if you practice intermittent fasting, you will have, lower rates of hyperglycemia, you may have lower BMI and things like this, but there's no scientific proof that intermittent fasting actually reduces cardiac mortality, right? So what does that do? That doesn't necessarily mean that intermittent fasting is useless, right? It also does not mean that intermittent fasting is the best kind of diet therapy there is, but it just proves what it is saying, that intermittent fasting there's no evidence that intermittent fasting has any effect on cardiac mortality, and that we need to do more studies on it. And so the thing is that if somebody has the resources to carry out a larger study, which is something that we wanted to do, there was no war, but what we wanted to do was to study intermittent fasting in patients who have these diseases and to follow them for 2 years to see whether they had any kind of reduction in cardiac mortality, seriously ill patients, and see if intermittent fasting actually helped them in conjunction with their medication and so on and so forth. Now, remember that the first part of the study, the systematic review, was a very simple study, all things considered. But the next part of the study, which would be to actually prove whether the intermittent fasting worked, would be for us to design a study, which would involve, choosing certain types of patients, having a study protocol, and all this fun stuff. So remember that, research is always like, it's this ongoing process. Once you finish writing one paper, you will want to write a second one. Sometimes you have these great papers that need to be written like over a series of 6 or 7 different papers, right? So the process is always the same though. You begin with background research, then you sit and write it, then you have one of your fellow colleagues sit and read through it and see whether you're consistent with what you're saying and writing and it's consistent with the data. And then all of you sit down again to rewrite it so that it can be published in a journal. Now that part, the publishing part, is one of the most frustrating things, simply because each journal has its own format, right? You have 2 different formats of citation. One is the APA style, and then the other is the Elsevier standard style, then there's Harvard and so on and so forth. And then the worst thing is that, you can't submit to journals simultaneously. So that means that if I submit to journal number 1, I can't submit the same paper to journal number 2. I have to wait for a response. And so what happens is that, one paper that has been written, say, in August, for example, will get published maybe now in May, right? And so you have to be one of the most important skills, I would say, more than, your ability to do research or data analysis, is to have patience, just patience, because this is a long process. Even one of the papers that I had written back in 2020 was published last month. So it took 1 year for that paper, more longer than a year for that paper to get published. And yes, publishing is an expensive process as well, because sometimes you need to pay maybe 600 euros, 1,000 euros, and so on and so forth to get published. So you have to, sort of trust your guides and so on and so forth to find a good journal where you can get published for free. Or sometimes you have to apply for funding to get published, but that is a separate topic for a separate day. And maybe I'll talk about it in a separate issue, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. And Aliha asks, which departments are more willing to give students research opportunities? And also, how do you go by asking the doctors to allow you to participate? And will the research be conducted in English or Bulgarian?
Okay, so now, at the risk of being as politically correct as possible, there are certain departments that you don't approach. I'm not going to mention them here, but a good metric for understanding whether a department is good to approach or not is to just search the names of the heads of department in Elsevier. And once you search in Elsevier and you see that, okay, they have like 4 or 5 publications, 7 publications, 8 publications, just look whether the head of that department, for example, has been published with their students, or they've been published with their assistant doctors. If they are, then that means they're a research active department, and just go and speak to them. Now, I don't want to, different research departments have different priorities. There are different, they have different priorities, different funding requirements and so on and so forth. So I can't really tell you whether that's a good thing, whether they have medical students on board or not. But I'll tell you that there is only one way to find out, which is go and look and see if they have publications or not, and then make an assessment based on that. Now, the second thing is that you are in Bulgaria, so the data that you have access to will be in Bulgarian if it's patient data, but most of medical research is conducted in English, and you will have to write in English. Now, what does happen here is that a lot of the papers are written first in a Bulgarian draft, sort of, and they're sent off in, and then they are written and sent. One version of it is sent to a Bulgarian journal, okay? And then you have to rewrite the paper and then submit an English version to an international journal, okay? That is, I have noticed that happening here, and that is one good way to encourage, you know, the local language as well. But most of the time, even if you don't know Bulgarian, remember, this is not an exam hall. You know, you can use Google Translate if you find some difficulties. And for example, like if you want to look at patient histories and all that, if you don't understand something, use Google Translate and ask the doctor who's with you. That is the reason why when you approach a department, always try to approach the assistant doctors who are working there or the residents who are working there and ask them what research projects they are doing, because they will be able to assign you. Because complicated things like case histories and, you know, patient data and things like this require you to have a certain level of medical knowledge, or to be under the supervision of somebody who has that kind of medical knowledge. And you will get it here, you know, and especially at the Department of Oncosurgery, where we constantly encourage new students to join. We currently are working with a lot of students, and we would like more students to join. And if nothing else, oncosurgery is the best department for medical research. And you can join us at any time because we have a lot of other research projects coming.
Thank you. We have a lot of participants from other countries too, but yeah. Next question is by Jemima. How do you put your best foot forward when wanting to go into a research as a med student, especially if you have never done it before?
That way, look, you could, I mean, you could sort of just like, see, there is no such thing as a best foot forward, I think, you know, like, you know, if you want to approach research and you want to just go and ask that, yes, you want to, right? The one thing is that, you know, you have to just sort of admit the fact that you're not going to get an immediate response. Yeah, like most people are like, yeah, you know, yeah, we are interested, you know, yeah, okay, I'll let you know. Yeah, okay. But be polite, but be firm, and just try to follow up after a couple of weeks. Beyond that, there's literally nothing else you can do. I mean, you know, this is not a job application where, you know, you can come up with a big, huge CV and come up, you know, dressed up in a suit or whatever. And hypocrisy here, because I am in a suit. But remember that, like, when you are trying to do research and all that, the most important thing is that you are interested in research. That's it. Beyond that, there is nothing else that you can possibly do. There's no quantifiable metric. You know, like, for example, a lot of, yeah, there are quantifiable metrics like H indexes and all that, but then you're a medical student. The mere fact that as a medical student, you're interested in research is motivation enough. So, you know, just go up to a doctor and say, yes, sir, I'm interested in research. I've never done it before. Can you please help me out here? That's it. Yes, professor, can you please help me out with this research paper? That's it. That's the best way you can go forward. That's all. Nothing else is required. You know, this is a leveling field rather than a barrier to keep people out.
Thank you. And next question is by Antonia, and she asks, what do you recommend to improve our health?
I am not entirely sure. I see. I'm not sure if I have interpreted the question correctly. Could you please just like repeat it once more?
Yeah, I'm not sure as well, but if Antonia is here, she can.
Yeah, she can.
Yeah, Antonia Andreeva, if you want, you can unmute yourself. But I think her audio is not connected. So the question was, what do you recommend to improve our health? But yeah, we can.
Okay, maybe it's improve your health in general. I mean, if you want to improve your health, you know, eat properly, don't drink so much, sleep, and don't smoke. The standard 4-point assessment here. Yeah.
Thank you. And Hadia Ansar asks how to do research, how to get it published, and how does it help us in our CV?
Okay, so I have tried my best to answer the first two halves. If I keep repeating myself, people are going to fall asleep. So I'm going to ask the spicier part of the question, which is how does it affect your CV and how does it? If you're from the UK or if you're from any country, increasingly what has happened is that they expect the doctors to do literally everything, right? So when you want to apply to a postgrad program, you need to show that you're interested in research, you are interested in leadership, you're a good person, and so on and so forth. And at any given time, I'm only good at two things out of these 3 or 4 requirements that they have, right? So when it comes to something like the CV itself, right, you have to show that you are able to carry out research. And one of the main reasons why you should be able to do research itself is because, even if you don't become an academic with a PhD or like a professor or whatever, is because, every year the status of what we know in medicine is constantly changing, right? And a lot of countries, especially say the UK, Germany, they have in their requirements for licensing that you are up to date with the latest knowledge, right? And being up to date with the latest knowledge can only come if you are able to, read a research paper and are up to date with the latest research as best as you can. And the easiest way to do that is to be able to read research papers and stuff. The second thing is that when it comes to your CV, I'm going to talk about surgery in general because my area is actually surgery, not internal medicine per se. But in surgery, for example, and if you want to be a surgeon in the UK, you have to have a portfolio, right? And in the portfolio, you need to show that you have been published before, right? And that you have presented at conferences, that you have teaching experience, and that you have research experience, and you have done an audit and things like that. Now, all of these things that you need to show can only come if you've done some research, you've taught people, you've participated in audits and stuff like that. And the way to go about it is to start as early as possible. Now, in the UK, for example, people don't. People wait till they are F2s or maybe they're F3s when they, participate in in audits and things like this. But it is easier to be involved in research as a medical student for the simple reason that in medical school, you are associated with the university. You're not working at a hospital, and that hospital may not be a teaching hospital. You understand the difference between working at a hospital and working at a teaching hospital is that the teaching hospital has access and funding for research. There's constant research that is going on there, right? So it is important, and the way it affects your CV is that you're more likely, people who have publications and so on and so forth are more likely to be successful at job applications and at applications for being selected into postgraduate training in the UK and in other countries as well. For example, in Germany, for working and working towards a specialization, you do need to show that you've been part of research as well, because that is what is going to set your CV apart from other applicants. And if you're an international student, as are most of us here, you have to have a major edge simply because you are an international student. In India, for example, you don't really need medical research, but what medical research will help you do is to be able to apply for the MPhil, which is the Master of Philosophy that comes after your specialization, because in India, the specialization system is different. So it'll help you apply for the MPhil, and it'll also help you to apply for something called the Junior Research Fellowship Program. And that is how it'll affect your CV if you're from India. And of course, if you're interested in research, you can always, contribute to laboratories and stuff like that. And if you want an academic career, the more number of publications that you have, the better it is, and the more repute you have as a scientist. So. I do remember that one of the is there a question in the chat here as well? Yes.
Yes, so Hoshi asks, how can we know if any question that arises in our mind is worth researching or not?
Okay, you can't. See, people have all sorts of weird ideas, and sometimes they get published, and then you look at something called the retract factor or something when it gets completely retracted because it is nonsense, right? Now, for example, a few years ago, there was a study that was published. It was completely sexist and complete nonsense. The study design was, it was called the perception of professionalism in vascular surgery residents based on their Instagram posts. And what they did was that they actually looked at, they creeped on the Instagram handles of male and female residents in vascular surgery, and that passed off as a research paper, and then that was published. And why that was published, I don't know. And it obviously got ripped apart because it was utter garbage, and that space could have been used by actual research in vascular surgery. But remember that yes, you don't really know whether your idea is going to be good or not. Sometimes bad ideas get published, right? One of the most famous examples I can give you is this Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield, for those of us who are fortunate enough to not know who he was, Andrew Wakefield is single-handedly responsible for writing up a paper that linked autism and the MMR vaccine, thereby undoing years of public health advancements and spawning conspiracy theories that vaccines cause autism, which is not true. And it was published in the Lancet. And it was retracted after a month, but it was still published, and it caused immense harm. And the effects of that one paper written by Andrew Wakefield are felt even today, because the anti-vax movement has gone so far ahead that there are countries where there's a resurgence of polio, there's a resurgence of measles, there's a resurgence of mumps. Things that have been eradicated are now coming back because people are not getting vaccinated. Why? Because of one person's idiotic scientific paper that was written in the most with no adherence to scientific fact. Now, when you're going to write a research paper, one thing I would say is that more important than getting published is that you write with honesty and integrity, because the main aim of medical research is to improve patient outcomes. That is it. Now, you can get published at any time in your career, right? You can get published and everything in any time of a career, but if you're going to write nonsense, this stays in the permanent record. When you apply for a job or you apply anywhere, it's not just having 5 publications. Somebody's going to read every one of these publications and they will find out that you've written nonsense. And in many places, and in most places, writing nonsense is completely unacceptable. You will just have your application just thrown and chucked. And a lot of times what does end up happening is that, I personally know people who've written nonsense and have paid somebody to get it published somewhere, and have had their careers completely ruined, because that is exactly what happens. And that is something that you need to be aware of as well, because it is always harder to get published, and it's a very difficult process, and you will get published maybe once or twice when you're a medical student. Even that is enough, rather than getting published 5 times in garbage journals and then to discover that it was all nonsense and all that. And the other cardinal sin in scientific research is making things up. You can't just falsify data, because somebody somewhere is going to read it and they will discover that you falsified data, and then you're going to be in a world of trouble. So if you have ideas, yes, there's no real way, unless you speak about that idea to a third person, you can't make out if it's a good idea or a bad idea, because you are going to have a bias. And sometimes utterly nonsensical ideas get published. You can't do anything about it. It's just, the world is like that. But if you have an idea, write it down. 3 days later, think back on the idea, and if it doesn't embarrass you, doesn't make you feel stupid, then go and approach a senior doctor, or just start writing something and get somewhere with it. And then you'll understand that the more research you do, you will yourself come to know whether it's an idiotic idea or it's a good idea. And if at the end of a week you think it's still a good idea, then go take it to somebody and ask someone's help in writing it. Remember that a fresh set of eyes always helps to give you perspective, because you always need new perspectives with your own work, and that goes for any scientific work that you're doing.
Thank you. And Akanksha asks, is there any possibility by which we can be a part of any research being at home?
I am assuming that by home you mean that you're a student in Bulgaria and you're living and you're staying in India. I hope I'm correct. I'm not sure. Now, it depends on the kind of research it is. For example, if you're going to have
the thing is, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt,
No,
but
no,
the
please.
thing is that I'm a student in China and
Yeah.
I'm stuck at home. So, and
yeah.
I am not certain when I will return. So that's why I want to ask that I cannot be a part of any in-person research.
Mhm.
So can I be a part being at home?
Yeah, of course. See, the different types of research. So there is, see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen again, and let's go back to this brilliant presentation, and let's talk about the types of research that there are, right? You have letters to the editor and surveys and case studies, right? Now, case studies, multi-center audits, case history analysis, yeah, you can't do that if you're staying at home because you don't have access to the patient data. But systematic reviews, meta-analysis, surveys and letters to the editor, those are the things you can do because those count as medical research as well. So for example, one of the most important things you can actually do is to take a systematic review, right? So a systematic review would be anything, I'm not sure, like, systematic review of the link between hypertension and metformin use in patients below the age of 25. I don't know, just off the top of my head, right? The thing is that just requires you to sit at your desk and do a database search at PubMed, Elsevier, and Medline. You can easily do that at home. Now, you can contact one of your researchers and your professors and send them the idea that this is what you want to write, and you can coordinate based on that. It's perfectly all right. Yeah, things like a case history analysis, multi-center studies, and case studies themselves may be difficult because you cannot access patient data unless somebody sends you a copy of the patient data. If they send you a copy of all the patient data, then you can parse through it. You can do it at home. It's not a problem. And there are different types of medical research that you can take part in. So, it largely depends. And I'm aware that, yeah, like in the students in China have not yet been allowed to go back to China. So you'll have to probably look for collaborations with other countries if it's possible. But remember that writing letters to the editor, doing a systematic review, a literature review, those are usually very helpful and they're also easy to do as well.
Okay, and how do we go about doing systematic reviews?
So a systematic review is like same thing, first step is that you identify a problem. Now I have written a systematic review, so let me see if I can. Okay, so I wrote a systematic review as well, and the way we did it was very simple. In systematic reviews, what you have to do is that you first search with the relevant, you have to define the study parameters, right? So that means that, okay, what are you trying to study? So from the example I just gave right now, hypertension and metformin use in men under the age of 25, right? What a systematic review will do is that you have to look at all the papers that are about metformin use in 25-year-old males who have hypertension. So you construct a database search, which is hypertension, 25-year-old male, and metformin use, right? And then when you construct the search in PubMed, you just look at all the papers you can, and then you define it. Okay, we are going to only include studies from the past 5 years, right? And studies that are conducted with more than 5 patients, more than 10 patients. And once you define an inclusion criteria from say 7,000 possible studies, you only include 23 studies. And then you understand and study each of these 23 studies, right? And then you do something called a risk of bias assessment. So risk of bias assessment is like it's called the ROB tool, and you have ROB tool. You have two types of them. There's ROB1 and ROB2. You can use those, or if you can't use those, also it's also fine. You can look at all of those papers and then look at all the conclusions from those papers, right? And then analyze whether, number one, do they have enough patients? Number two, what are the conclusions from each of those studies, like, what is the rate of metformin use in 25-year-old males? How many of them use it? What are the clinical effects? And then once you study these 8 papers or 10 papers or 20 papers, because usually once you define your inclusion criteria, you will only have like 8 to 10 papers at the most. At the most, sometimes you may have 20 papers. Then what you do is that you just make a conclusion. You have a discussion page where you discuss the conclusions of every single paper that you've come across, and you discuss what is actually being said by each of those papers. And then you discuss what the papers are not saying. What are the limitations of your own study? What are the limitations of each of those studies, right? And then you discuss that, and then you write a conclusion that yes, okay, the further research has to be done in this field, that in this specific area of metformin use, the dosage is different in different countries, and there is increased reportage of men under the age of 25 reporting higher rates of diabetes, for example. This is just off the top of my head. And then you have a systematic review more or less ready. And then, because you're doing this alone, you can send this ready paper to a professor, or you and a professor can work towards it, and the professor will suggest some statistical analysis. You do the statistical analysis with the professor to see what is the level of bias in each of those papers. And if there is low level of bias, then the systematic review will prove something. Now, usually systematic reviews are to prove that a series of papers are proving something and not the other. So that would mean that, for example, they prove that the use of metformin is completely safe with little to no adverse effect in men under the age of 25 is what is proving, because more than, say, a certain percentage of, say, maybe more than 20% of the studies are saying the same thing, right? So you can write a systematic review that way. And you can write it just sitting at home and doing a database search and getting ahead with it. And you can ask your professors to help you out with it, because a systematic review is one of those types of papers that will need to be registered, I think, on Cochrane, but that depends. I don't think it's always required, and systematic reviews are a good way to start if you want a big project to start with. I hope that answers your question, because
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we have a question from Ishika. If you want to ask yourself, or I can read it.
Okay, I can't see the question, so.
Okay. Which areas of research should we explore, top 3 according to you, and which should we omit? And is there a gender bias in the field?
Yeah, there is a gender bias. There are more women involved in medical research than there are men. So of that conclusion, you can make your own quantifiable research, like quantifiable assumption. In terms of which are the 3 areas of research that you should get involved in? Okay, I can't answer that question for you. You'll have to answer that question for yourself. Now, personally, for me, I get involved in research or a lot of different types. I mean, for example, I've done research in public health, cardiology, oncological surgery, forensic medicine, cardiac surgery. I mean, anything that you want to get involved in, you can. I've also written papers on evolutionary medicine, which is not really, which is very theoretical, and it's not a very well-known area of medicine. I've also done research in ophthalmology and gynecology as well. So it depends largely, like, it's entirely on your own, like, interest. Now, the 3 areas of medicine that you shouldn't research, that's also entirely dependent on you. Like, I can't suggest things of what research fields that you can go into. But yeah, there is one field of medicine that I wouldn't ask you to go into, which is whichever field of medicine, you don't want to. That's it. If you don't want to go into it, don't bother doing research in it. Because the thing is that if, for example, research requires a lot of motivation. And if you're not interested in a certain field, then don't do it. For example, I am not particularly interested in, say, pharmacology itself, right? And also because pharmacological research for me is really difficult to, like, wrap my head around. So I don't really do it, because if somebody sent me like the whole data set, because I was invited once to do it, and I had to see the data analysis of 10 years worth of scientific research on some drug, and it was too much, and I couldn't do it, and I had to drop out of that study because I found it was just giving me a headache. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't develop a certain affinity for it, because I didn't really, you can start with you have to give yourself a chance. So maybe you'll discover something that you like. I don't know. It depends. Yeah, I hope that answers your question as well. Yeah.
And the same person asks, what are some rookie errors we can avoid?
So rookie errors are always, reading too many papers, right, that are not related to the study that you're doing. So for example, if you're doing a certain study and then you just sit and read 20 other papers that are not related, yeah, you're just wasting your time. Like, you're not really, I mean, we are all guilty of it. I'm not saying there's just some times when we just keep reading paper after paper after paper. The other rookie error is that, see, the abstract and the title are not the only ways to read a paper. You need to open up the paper and access it and read it to be able to actually understand what is being said. And you need to read a paper in full. So it is important that you spend a lot of time on it. And yeah, one other rookie mistake is expecting results within days or weeks or whatever. No, research takes a lot of time, and you have to learn to be very patient, very, very patient. And sometimes, you will write a paper and you will have the publication, the editors send back a thing saying, yeah, your paper essentially sucks, so they're not going to publish it. And that is a very, very irritating feeling. But it also teaches you to have a lot of stoicism and resilience, and just, keep your head down and keep moving forward. I mean, you have to learn to take disappointments well. That's one of the things I would say is a good piece of advice. It's not really a rookie mistake. Rookie mistakes are when you have too many expectations. But yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for your answers. They were very detailed and on point. We had 3 other questions, but because I believe that you covered them, I didn't ask, but do you want me to ask them if you have anything to add?
Not really. See, if I don't know which those questions are, but I think if you feel that I've answered them already, then it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. I think we can. Remember everyone to fill in the post-event form Pradeepa has posted on the chat in order to get the certificate of attendance. And if everyone agrees to put their video cameras on, and we could take a picture of the participants, of everyone. Okay, let's wait a few more seconds. Okay, I'll take a screenshot. And if you take a picture, you may tag us on Instagram. And yeah, I would like to thank everyone for coming today. And also, I want to remind you that we have 3 positions available in our university's SRC. So NU Pleven's SRC, Student Research Council, has secretary membership in charge and PR head positions available. So if you want to know more, you can contact me or Judith. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Aparajaya Shankar, on behalf of GCMR and everyone here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. See you at the next event.
Thank you, sir.